Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, and it's time to talk about the defense from the game against the Commanders. Outstanding, dominant performance where the 2s and 3s really overwhelmed the Commanders. And joining me to talk about it is Jake Vogel. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Ken. How about yourself?
No complaints at all. Great stuff. The Ravens a big preseason now. They only allowed one offensive touchdown in 3 games. Did also allow pick 6 as well, but fantastic preseason really for the Ravens on defense. A little less so on offense.
Yeah, for sure. We'll get into that with the roster breakdown and our opinions of all the positions, but for sure, I think the defense kind of stood out this preseason.
Yeah. One of the questions that comes up immediately is they've had so much outstanding defensive depth in this preseason. Obviously, great inside linebacker depth play, some really promising nose tackle play. The 6th and 7th outside linebackers look very good. Much better than the Ravens have had, I think, in the past. The cornerbacks, they've got extra defensive backs at each position. Will that depth translate to value during the regular season? Because the Ravens' last chance, in a sense, to have some of this value not slip through their hands like sand, is to keep these guys on the roster on Tuesday.
I think that we will see some of the depth translate to the 53-man roster and providing some insurance for the veteran DBs and other positions that have kind of dealt with some injuries. That's kind of my own thoughts. Yeah.
Do you see the possibility of a trade coming up between now and Tuesday?
Definitely a possibility. I don't normally put anything at 0%, but it's not seeming very likely at this point.
Yeah, trades are not that common. Player for player trades are really not common. I'm not sure who the Ravens could really even acquire in terms of positional strength that would be better than who they currently have on the roster. I just don't think that there's a lot of teams looking to get rid of a player like that. So it almost has to be a player for draft compensation situation. They have, maybe some players who could help even a good team, but I don't. Generally speaking, if you're a team that's observing the Baltimore Ravens, you're going to wait for them to make cuts and try and see if you can get the claims made.
Yeah, for sure. Agree with that.
All right. A lot of jockeying for position going on in this last game. I kind of feel like we should start with that, but obviously we have a lot of players playing well in the defensive backfield, extra inside linebackers and Martin and Higgins playing well. A lot of outside linebackers that really, we get down to it. Ham and Rucker played well, even though now Ajabo seems to have that 5th spot lined up. But let's talk about each positional group and maybe what a normal roster would look like and where the Ravens might go. So usually, first of all, it's 25, 25, and 3 on the roster. So we're going to assume for purposes of this show that we get to roster 25 defensive players, and we'll dig deep in that with Jake. So start us off, Jake. Take us through the defensive backfield, maybe how you see the roster looking now.
So for me, I did a lot of thinking about this over the past couple weeks, and the play from the cornerbacks was just more exceptional than the play from safeties. So in my 53 prediction, or kind of how I would do it, I put Martin, the corner, Keon Martin, on the 53 as a 7th corner. Part of that is also the lingering issues going on with Jair Alexander. Chidobe Awuzie has dealt with some stuff in camp, but I think he's healthier now. Humphrey has had problems as well. It's just a position that you can't have enough of. It's a position of strength on the team, but also if some of those guys go down, at the same time, you're going to be reaching at the end of what's available to you. And I think those guys like Martin have just kind of stood out, as well as JAD. I didn't even say his name yet, but for me, he's the 5th corner on the roster. In a normal year, based on how he's played, he'd be the 4th corner. But yeah, just a really talented group. TJ Tampa would be number 6 for me. But yeah, I really like Martin a lot. The safeties, Lowry takes the 4th spot. Kane, I guess, is kind of slotted in as that 3rd safety. And I think Bo Braid can probably make the team as a practice squad player. I'm not overly worried about losing him. And I thought that Igbinosun, looked pretty good in the game. Nothing spectacular, but certainly practice squad worthy. So I wouldn't be overly worried about, losing one of those guys.
Okay, so first of all, I think I agree 100% with how you have the roster set there. I think first of all that they'll go with 11 based on the needs at the other position. Although, boy, they could keep 5 inside linebackers too. But if they go with 11 DBs, it'll be 7 cornerbacks, exactly the guys you said, exactly the positions you've said in terms of who's the 5th, who's the 6th, and who's the 7th is Keon Martin, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
They get a backup slot corner in that case. I think that the one thing that I would add to what you said is that the Ravens right now, with the loss of both Kane and Longerbeam before the season, have become older at cornerback. And this was a year where they would have liked to develop and get younger. And I think it really becomes important to have a first-year cornerback on the team that you might be able to trust in 26 when you're about to lose potentially JAD, Awuzie, Alexander, and possibly even Humphrey, who you're going to have to make a big financial commitment to after the season to keep.
Yeah, and I do think with that many guys, being on the docket for, going somewhere else, a new contract expiring, whatever, I think the Ravens keep at least one of them, or maybe you could just say one of them. Mm-hmm. Even still, you're losing 2 guys for like pretty close to 2. Which means 100% it would be really good to have some young corner depth besides Nate Wiggins going into next year. So yeah, I think in this particular season, Keon Martin makes a ton of sense in that. I thought the way he played reminded me of, some guys in the past, like a Tavon Young, just, some smaller, agile corners, they get their nose in there. They're not afraid to, come down and make hits, get involved in the run game. I liked his effort, even if he's not the biggest guy. So that's kind of who I think of.
Yeah, he certainly is not afraid of contact, despite his size. And he's a small guy, 5'9", 170. And if you want to take the devil's advocate position that Keon Martin should go to the practice squad or be cut and risk to waivers, it's that he's in a very deep size and shape group. So slot corners are more common than outside corners. Outside corners really need the aircraft carrier size. And it's a little bit more unusual to find those guys. And that the slot corners, it is a complex position to play. You're more like a combination linebacker, safety, off-ball player, and you got to be able to handle a short zone and all that entails rather than just be on an island. Which in some ways is more difficult, even though obviously, island corners are valued more. But I think the youth argument is probably the good one. I think he's the size and shape pool that he probably slips through waivers anyway, despite the great preseason he's had, is the other side of that coin, is that they probably could sneak him onto the practice squad. If they didn't, boy, it would be tough. I mean, they lost. Who did they lose? Caillou Blue Kelly, who was not a great player.
Yeah, but the thing with him, he was a 5th round draft pick, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So even if a team is, negligent, they're not even watching preseason football, and they say, my priors tell me this guy was a draftable corner, we'll pick him up because the Ravens cut him.
Yeah, they scouted. So they scouted him coming out of school, and they knew, whereas almost nobody knows very much about Keon Martin. It's true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now the other thing you mentioned was about the relative position of Lowry on the roster, that you think he's the 4th corner. So one of the things that could happen this year is the Ravens could move to play some dime defense. And I don't know that's going to happen, but I think it's a possibility. There's nobody who's been obviously outstanding among the linebackers in terms of their ability to play coverage football. Simpson's probably been better than last year, and he had a tip pass, but that was at the line of scrimmage. He wasn't in coverage doing it. And Buchanan, frankly, has looked a little lost in coverage, not nearly as good as some of the others. Hummel won't play defense. I expect him to play special teams and be kind of a last resort on defense. I don't think either of the guys, whether it's Martin or Higgins, even if they're on the team, are ideal coverage players. I think they're big downhill thumpers who can also help you on special teams. But the one guy who has had an interesting preseason is Bo Braid, and they've been playing him a lot at slot corner. Now, I'm not in favor of Bo Brady making the team. Again, comes from a big size and shape pool, not a drafted player last year. I can't believe there's going to be a tremendous amount of demand for him. I think he makes it through to the practice squad, and the Ravens can elevate him 3 times. But here's the argument why you might keep him. The Ravens did not play a single snap of dime the entire preseason. They may, in fact, have it figured out that the dime back they want is really Kyle Hamilton playing up next to Roquan on 3rd down. That may be exactly what they want to do. But if they wanted to train Braid as a dime back, one of the ways they could have done it was to use him as a slot corner, which is exactly what they did, instead of using him on the back end. You give him short area coverage responsibilities, and you don't mess up we always have 2 inside linebackers on the field. So if Orr were saying, look, I want to train him to be a dime, but I don't want to play dime and tip our hand or even do it this preseason because I want to leave the inside linebackers on the field also, then putting him at slot corner makes a lot of sense in terms of creating, a zone defense set of responsibilities for him.
Yeah, I really agree. I hadn't thought about that. It makes a ton of sense. I think just like you were saying, and I mentioned earlier, Braid feels pretty safe to cut and try to sneak onto the practice squad. At least early into the season, I wouldn't expect him to get poached. But as injuries start accruing across the league, then he might be somebody that would get picked up. But yeah, the playing slot corner and kind of getting him those valuable reps in that box area makes a ton of sense, where he's not, playing a true safety role.
He hasn't, by the way, I want to be clear about this. I don't think Bo Braid has played poorly in any sense this preseason. I think he's been perfectly fine. It's just all his contributions seem to be close to the line of scrimmage. And part of that is they had him playing slot corner, for instance, in the Washington game exclusively until that final series of the entire game, when all Washington did was basically run the ball with, I think, 1 pass just to get the game over with. So there wasn't an opportunity for him to, be in some deep coverage or a half field coverage like we've seen from Lowry for a lot of this preseason. He's had much more opportunity. Certainly seems to be ahead of Braid, at least in that sense. Are you sure from what you've seen so far that Kane would be ahead of Lowry in terms of taking over a half field role if something happened to either Hamilton or Starks?
No, I don't, which is why I feel pretty confident that Lowry will make the team. To me, he seems to be a little bit rangier and have some better instincts playing a true half field role. I think Kane he's about NFL average, or maybe just a little bit low NFL average play at safety. But I think he can be better than that when you're talking about him coming downhill. Where he still struggles a little bit is that speed and recognition to, get over the top, be that the safety net of the defense and, get to the play in time. I think you could see that in practice too. I wasn't at any Ravens practices, but just from some clips, it's maybe not his strong suit, but I think he can still develop. But I would say Lowry might be the third safety. If there was an injury, he'd be the first one out there playing in a half field role.
Yeah, I don't think that's impossible either. Kane, obviously, is critically important for special teams because he's one of the major central figures. So is Braid, by the way. The Ravens are going to have a hard time replacing his snaps if they decide they have to cut him. So with Kane, though, he had separated himself, I think, from the field as the third safety in this group this summer. And Lowry had made some plays, but he also been beaten a few times. And I think that in 2 of the 3 preseason games, I saw some similar things from Lowry where, yeah, he's done some really good tackling things. He had a bunch of cleaning up on other people's misses in this last game against Washington, but he has missed a tackle or 2 himself. And I think on the back end, the best evidence we saw was the interception against the Cowboys. How much evidence that is, I don't want to undervalue the thing, but I also don't want to pretend like that one play makes all the difference. Kane had a couple interceptions in camp too, and as did Lowry, and they each of them I think is got something to offer on the back end. From the order of entry, I think Kane is likely ahead, but I'm not sure that's the way I want it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely.
All right, let's move on and talk about there's another player I want to talk about. There's a valuable player the Ravens have that has gotten no press so far, and that's Marquise Robinson, who is the next guy on the corner chart. Now, he's gotten second half play. I don't know if the Ravens might actually be hiding him a little bit in terms of not getting him out there as much in the last 2 games. But I'd be real disappointed if he's not on the practice squad. And he's a full size corner. He's 6 feet and a quarter, I think. He's got the aircraft carrier or near aircraft carrier size necessary to handle the outside responsibilities. Those are harder to come by, and another young guy who, the Ravens might want to give a chance.
Yeah, I agree. He looked really good in that first preseason game, and I think he's kind of snuck by in these next 2 games, probably by intention.
All right. So anyway, hopefully he makes it through the practice squad. If he does, I don't see him making the team over Keon Martin, but I think he could. He would be a great guy to have at the top of the practice squad for an outside corner depth issue that could easily develop as the season went on. All right, let's move on to inside linebacker. Why don't you take us through your view of the position first? Since I'm doing a lot of the talking here, it seems like.
Yeah. So this is kind of going to give you a peek into my 53. I really like the undrafted linebackers we have. I give the slight nod to Jay Higgins. In my 53-man roster, I believe you could get away with cutting Jake Hummel, putting him on the practice squad, elevating him for a few games, and then see what injury occurs to put him back on the 53. It's probably not the riskiest thing to, cut your undrafted guys and see if both of them make it to the practice squad or one of them gets picked up and then you have the other. Just what I was feeling was Jay Higgins is my 4th. And, I kept Roquan, Trenton Simpson, and Teddy Buchanan ahead of Higgins. In this Commanders game, or not Commanders, is that what?
Commanders. That's
Commanders.
Yep.
I really liked Martin. He made a nice play in coverage, something that you were just talking about, where these guys are really more of that physical, 2-down linebacker type builds. But he made a really nice play, about 15 or so yards deep in coverage. He was, right there and broke the pass up. So I was really kind of pleased with that and intrigued with what that could be in the future. Chandler Martin would be awesome for the practice squad. Same with Higgins, but I really kind of want to sneak or get Higgins onto the 53, have him develop. Zach Orr is really taking a liking to him, as a former undrafted rookie linebacker as well in Baltimore. So get one of them on the 53, get Hummel playing on special teams. I don't think he's a big factor on defense like you're mentioning. And if there's an injury that occurs, I would rather see Higgins or Martin out there than Hummel. I could be wrong about that. I just kind of view the position that way.
Well, I view it that way probably even for 2025, but I definitely view it that way for 2026 through 28 when the Ravens have no stake in Hummel's future. Now he's here, and sometimes with a veteran player, particularly a vet min guy, you can continue to get him at the vet minimum, and he could build up a position here that would be significant. But the payoff for a player like Hummel doesn't really come until he spent 4 years in Baltimore and he can tap into some of that vet service benefit money that Ricard takes the entire pool this year. Tylan Wallace didn't take the pool, but he's treated that way, with a contract for about $2 million in his case. So he could be a very short-term guy. In fact, he could end up, just about anywhere if he got cut. Here's the one thing I don't know, and I need somebody like Brian McFarland to answer this question, but he's a fourth-year player. I don't know if because he's with the Ravens and has already signed a second deal, if he has to go through waivers, but I think he might because of where he is in his service schedule. The reason I have any temerity about that at all is a few years ago when they had Sam Mustipher, he was in the exact same position, a fourth-year player, and he's just signed with the Ravens, and the Ravens were able to cut him and not put him through the waiver process somehow. So I'm not sure exactly what the rules are. So Hummel may not be subject to it if he may be. If he is not subject to it, he's an outstanding candidate for a handshake deal.
Right.
If he is subject to it, it still might be the right call.
Yeah. I did not realize that he was in his fourth year. The thing that I had heard about his contract was only about $100,000 in guarantees.
Yep, correct.
Which was, essentially nothing in the grand scheme of the salary cap. That's very minimal.
Well, in point of fact, either Martin or Higgins would be cheaper, even considering the 100,000. So,
yeah. So I wasn't overly worried about the release of Hummel and then bringing him back for just losing $100,000. Hey, come work out here, be part of our training camp. Here's $100,000, and we're going to bring you back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and I think I know some other people in the Ravens media believe that he's been signed. I had a little conversation with Jeff Zrebiec about it, and he said, I think they brought Hummel here for a reason. They're replacing a number of special team snaps, and he's right. I mean, it'd be very difficult to replace all of the Board and Harrison snaps and Christian Welch, for that matter. They played about 800 snaps in total between them. And the two guys we're talking about cutting are two of the guys who are earmarked to fill a ton of those in Bo Braid and Jake Hummel. So we'd have to be pretty sure that Higgins or Martin, whoever steps in for Hummel, is going to be able to take that share of snaps with not a huge downgrade in play.
Right.
Tough ask, but it's possible. The other thing is the Ravens may be short a big for special teams early in the year, and you need guys, just to explain what I mean by that, you need players with a little more weight to them than your typical safeties and corners who take up a lot of your special teams burden with their speed, but you need some heavier guys to effectively play on the inside of punt and punt return formations. So they can either punt block players or they are punt players who block for the punter, being the other one. So whichever way you're taking them, you need some linebackers and tight ends to play those roles. And the Ravens are a tight end short without Likely, and they could be, no better off in terms of linebackers. So it might be that a fifth linebacker would be a reasonable call as well. Of course, that means probably that there's not room for Keon Martin or somebody else, like a surprise cut like David Ajabo.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. In this conversation and in the way that I built my 53-man roster, if I were submitting it and trying to win the contest with the Ravens, which I'm not. But anyways, I did the 25-25-3. However, and this seems to be the case many years for Ravens fans, the feeling is that the defense is stronger. And it makes more sense to allocate an additional roster spot to the defense and one less to the offense, just based on what we've seen in training camp and in the preseason. If that were to happen, then I think a spot that you might take away from the offense would be running back with Rasheen Ali.
Right.
A kind of a position that's earmarked for him on many people's 53-man rosters. And I know it's a little bit of a debate. But I think that's where I would go if I was trying to do the 26, 24, 3.
I'm with you, and I think they have other options to return kicks other than running backs. Tyler Wallace has obviously done it, and they've had plenty of other players have too, for that matter. I don't think they lose out. If they needed to use Justice Hill for a few games in that role, they could, and they want to use elevations, they can do it that way. They've got options, but we're going to need to stick with the 25 limit here.
Yeah, for sure.
But we certainly can mention it. Let's move on to the outside linebacker group, where Ajabo has had a reasonable preseason. We talk about him some individually, but it's been kind of an overshadowed preseason. His two biggest plays, I'll say, of the entire preseason were free runs.
Exactly.
The one for the sack and the one for the -2 on 4th and 1, or whatever it was, 4th and 1, 4th and 2.
Right.
So that's unfortunate. But on the other side, I think all 5 tackles that he's made have been defensive wins. So he's got that. And he's gotten a little bit of pressure. So that's good. There's nothing about it that tells me he's way outperformed expectations to a level that he should be the guy the Ravens really want to lean on. There is a big negative from Ajabo, and that is that if you bring him on the roster as the 5th outside linebacker, he doesn't play special teams at all, or not. He has a very small special teams footprint. He is on the punt blocking team, meaning he's on the punt return team, to try and block punts. But he doesn't do much else. I think he's on the field goal block team as well.
Yeah, that's a problem when you're getting at the end of a position group, especially one that naturally makes sense to help out on special teams. I agree. The big plays from Ajabo have looked good and splashy initially, but they are unblocked. He's not, being contested on his rushes. In that TFL, great play, but it worked out well and he did his job. And then same thing with the sack. Malik Ham looked really good in this game. He has more team control. I'm not suggesting that the team go in that direction on the 53-man roster. I think he can probably still go on practice squad this year, but he might have a little bit more juice than Ajabo, and I know that's tough for some people to hear. There seems to be a lot of Ravens fans that want Ajabo to really work out, and I do too, but I don't know. I just want the best player out there. And I haven't seen anything from Ajabo that is spectacular. I've been, pleasantly impressed at times, but I haven't been wowed. And he's a, former 2nd-round pick that people thought would go in the 1st round if it wasn't due to injury.
Right.
And the injuries have definitely affected him, but at this point, it doesn't matter. Like, you have to play.
I mean, it's all a sunk cost. I mean, the fact that he was a 2nd-round draft pick certainly does not matter at this point.
Yep.
It often does not matter before this point. If you're another team, it's kind of rare that we've been in this position with the Ravens, but it's not unheard of because they've had 2nd-round draft picks like Mount Cody, Sergio Kindle, Bronson Kaufusi might have been a 2 or a 3. Kemalai Correa, I think, was a 2. I mean, they've had some that didn't work out. They've had some, and they've had to readjust to reality. And I think at the very least you could say about Ajabo is that he's got a lower ceiling and a lower floor than he did the night he was drafted. As much as Ravens fans, don't like that being true, and I wish it weren't true too. I mean, he's done a few things that have been good, and it seems like every year something gets in the way. Last year, he was a healthy scratch for a number of games. Now, that's not a good thing, but looking at this roster of outside linebackers they had, I see it happening again. I think he'll be he's one of the easy game day deactivations you have on a very tough roster to find a lot of inactives.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, We talked about him. I do have him on my 53 because Adisa Isaac's injury would most likely put him on the IR DTR without him even factoring on the 53 this year, the way that they've constructed that. So yeah, it's the 5 outside linebackers, including Ajabo, and Adisa Isaac doesn't really count on that.
Do you think that prior to Tuesday, the Ravens may
You ever have one of those days where everything's off? Well, Mood can help with that. And let me tell you about Mood. It's the online cannabis brand that is changing the way we handle everything, from stress to sleepless nights, with functional gummies that are 100% federally legal cannabis. Mood launched to make cannabis affordable, accessible, and transparent, while at the same time supporting American farmers growing premium hemp on small pesticide-free farms. Their gummies are next level. Seriously, I've tried a few, and each one feels totally different. The Sleepy Time gummies, out like a light, immediately asleep. The Epic Euphoria, it's perfect when you just need a reset to feel good again. What makes them unique? Mood combines THC with herbs and adaptogens, so you get real targeted effects. You're not going to find this in your typical dispensary. And here's the best part. Mood ships discreetly to most states, offers a 100-day satisfaction guarantee, and right now you get 20% off your first order with the promo code RAVEN. Just head to mood.com. Find your perfect gummy and use the code RAVENS at checkout to save 20%.
They'll consider everything, but do you think they'll really look outside the building and maybe make a phone call to someone like Jadeveon Clowney and figure out where he is?
Yeah, I mean, I think Clowney could provide a little bit more than Ajabo this year, so I don't think that's crazy. I also think before the 53-man roster is constructed, it's not necessary. Clowney is already pretty familiar with the defense. Yeah, there's a change at coordinator, but I mean, we'd be able to bring him in here, a couple weeks into the season, just like we did Kyle Van Noy, if we need some additional help. I'd like to see what Mike Green can do. I have a feeling that they're going to give him a good amount of reps, and it's going to progress throughout the season just based off what we've seen so far. And then on top of that, Adafe Owe and Kyle Van Noy are going to be your leading guys, at least to start the season.
Don't disagree at all. Is Clowney a guy who can help you on early downs? Because that is a place where the Ravens, they either have to take snaps from Kyle Van Noy or from Owe, use them on early downs. And I mean, obviously those two can split time, and Tavius can be a regular first down guy. The nature of football is there's a lot more first and second downs than there are third downs.
Sure.
Because so you really need guys to play those downs and to be effective. I could see a role where Mike Green is just a situational pass rusher this year. In the case of Clowney, he'd be a guy I trust anytime on the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel bad that I didn't mention Tavius yet, because he's been awesome.
Yep.
Progressed his whole career, and I think he's taken another step this training camp. So I think he's going to be a big part of what they're doing, and from all reports, he's adding to his pass rush repertoire, and he's going to want to be out there on third down too. I don't know how much he's actually going to be out there, but maybe some second and longs, he'll have the opportunity to kind of pin his ears back and get after the quarterback, and that's pretty exciting as well. So Clowney for sure would make sense on a first and second down role, and he has the tools to do stuff on third down, kick inside too. He can be a Pernell McPhee type player for us, but really with a healthy roster, which, knock on wood for that always, the Ravens have the horses, even on third down. They don't necessarily need to add a Clowney, but it doesn't hurt.
Right. I'd agree with you on that. And unfortunately, one of the problems with Ham is he's actually in his third year now. So it's not like there's a ton of sand left in the hourglass. It's not like Ajabo fourth year, Ham third year, that it's some obvious thing. The one thing you would get with Ham is you get a player who's going to play a lot of special teams. So he's more like an Adisa Isaac in terms of being an athlete than he probably is like a David Ajabo. So this is a really tough call at outside linebackers. I kind of hoped that, and this is bad when this is the case, but I kind of hope that circumstances would conspire for the most favorable outcome, which I think would have been Adisa Isaac was healthy, showed some juice in the preseason, which he did before he was hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just was an easy call to have to trade or cut Ajabo. And it would have seemed tough on him, and it would have been a hard goodbye. But on the other hand, it would have been the right move for the club. Now that didn't happen. Isaac is hurt; he won't be back for half a season. Now, I wonder if they're truly going to be okay with Ajabo, or if they have to look outside the organization, or even consider Ham for who he is to get him through at least half a season here.
Right.
Yeah. All right. By the way, really agree with your comment though about they could afford to wait on Clowney. I don't think there's a whole bunch of teams knocking down Clowney's door right now. And he had been kind of a mercenary, traveled around from team to team his whole career. So it seems unusual that there would not be a lot of realization of his value, given the fact he had such a good year 2 years ago. And actually last year didn't have a terrible year with Carolina either. I would think somebody would be into him. I do think there may be some fatigue from him. And I think part of it is, for him, because I think that he's kind of demonstrated he doesn't like to go to training camp. And there's certain players who just have always felt that way, and they really don't want to be there. And they kind of let it be known. And they're still, I'm just still mulling the offers. Let's see what's out there. I don't think any of these really meet my needs. And all of a sudden, training camp's over. Okay, I'll sign now.
Yeah.
Oh. All right. So we talked about the outside linebackers. The defensive line seems to be the one place where the Ravens have probably got it figured out. 5 defensive linemen is the number they always keep. So Travis Jones, Broderick Washington, Matabike, Peebles, who was just drafted, and John Jenkins would have been the guy that they could have saved some money by going with one of the young players. I just, in my own opinion, I don't believe either of Jones or Okoye did enough to justify the roster spot.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think Brent Urban has looked great when he played. He didn't play in this last game, but he's a handshake guy. I think they'll put him on the practice squad, bring him up, get him some money, and then some sort of injury may occur, and he'll be on the 53. He's just looked really, really good, really stout. I know that he's not a replacement nose tackle, but he's such a good run defender that I think you can kind of fit him onto the roster at some point in the season.
It's really got to be an injury, though, to Peebles, Matabike, or Broderick Washington that Urban replaces.
Right.
And even then, you're losing something probably in doing so. And then you would figure you'd lose something because he's your 6th lineman. He's kind of your 6th choice of among those guys. Broderick Washington has had a very good camp. And one thing I'll say, he's had a number of tip passes. He's had some good pressure. But the treatment he's gotten this camp to be sitting out of preseason games, he's never gotten that before. This is really good, a good sign for how the coaches feel about his season to come.
That's really good. I think a lot of fans that aren't at practice and whatever else don't have much of a reading on what Broderick has done, and that's really encouraging for me to hear. I've heard it from a couple people that have been there, like Nikhil. But yeah, hearing that from you too definitely gives me some hope for his season, because he was a guy that was playing well, got the contract, had some troubles in his play, and then kind of started turning the corner again last year. But for him to really kind of turn it up a notch this season would be awesome.
Yeah, be great to see. I mean, it's just so often they need that extra lineman. When Travis Jones was hurt, Washington took on a much larger role in terms of what, in particular, I think the Tampa game, he had to play just a lot of snaps. So it's an important position. It's always a position where, for whatever reason, the Ravens seem to be most comfortable, like traveling right along the edge of the precipice. Going into games with 4 defensive linemen. I mean, I get so upset every time I see an inactive list, which leaves them with 4. But I hope that will not happen this year. They got more of a specialist nature to the team with both Jenkins and Peebles out there that I think they probably will avoid doing that.
Right. Yeah.
All right. If you had to I guess we've been through a lot of this with the individuals. I was going to ask the question of if you had to sacrifice a spot somewhere, how could you create a spot that we haven't talked about so far? Is there anybody else that you'd be willing? And I guess what I'm really asking at this point in the year is there anybody you'd want to sneak onto IR by handshaking a player, which might be Ben Cleveland, by the way. Ben Cleveland might be the best handshake agreement guy the Ravens have. Is there a defensive player you'd like to handshake onto the roster to have as a midseason replacement? So it's got to be somebody who's currently on the roster or projected to be. So it could be, for instance, Keon Martin or Marquise Robinson, Jay Higgins or Chandler Martin.
Right.
I mean, but the problem is all those guys are young guys and you'd want them to actually be practicing. Is there anybody else that, and maybe that's the case of all of these, that there's really nobody who you want to sneak in as a midseason replacement who isn't a young player? But I'm just trying to think about how they could sneak somebody onto the roster like this by making use of a handshake deal and an IR DTR spot.
Yeah, that's tough. I feel like I did all of the roster gymnastics that I could in creating the 53 by getting on, Lowry at the end of the safeties, getting Braid to the practice squad, getting Keon Martin in as a seventh corner. The Adisa Isaac injury honestly helps Ajabo get on, but Malik Ham would be good. But I honestly think you don't need to do that to get him. I think practice squad probably works. And then, sorry.
Oh, for Ham, you're saying you can get Ham on the yes.
Ham on the practice squad.
I do basically agree that. By the way, Ham has been an IR DTR before and started practicing with the team, and then he shut it down at the end of the period and reverted him to season-ending IR because they didn't need him. So it was a prophylactic return that they were using him for. They could do that. They could do that with Ham again if they really thought he'd be taken. But I agree with you. I don't think the chance is particularly high that he'd be claimed away. Now they could do it with a player like Okoye, but I don't think he knows how to play football well enough to be ready for that. Now, if they really felt like all he needed was a lot of weight room time, then maybe. But I don't get that sense. The guy doesn't know how to manage his energy level on the field. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah, I agree. The defensive line is the other kind of spot besides inside linebacker, like I mentioned with Hummel, where you can really try to do a handshake deal. Jenkins could be a handshake guy.
There's one. Yeah.
Does it make a difference? I'm not sure.
So Jenkins, in the case of Jenkins, we're not talking about him being the handshake guy because the handshake guy has to be somebody like Cleveland who you're going to get back and immediately put on the roster. But he'd be the guy who would be IR'd in Jenkins' case and brought back as need arose after some number of weeks in the season, which is a minimum of 4. So I think Jenkins would be a possibility for that kind of thing. Another guy thinking to the offensive side, Rasheen Ali might be a reasonable choice to do that too.
Oh, for sure.
You could stash him and bring him back later. But if you're seriously concerned about your running back depth right now, I mean, the Ravens have they have 3 running backs who are so much clearly better than Rasheen Ali that I wouldn't even blink an eye at cutting Ali. But if you want to keep Ali and you want to make sure your kick return unit is still good and that you have a third running back if the need arises, then stick him on IR and wait it out with him. That's a reasonable solution, I think.
Here's one. I don't know if it's the exact same scenario, but Carson Vincent. I know that he played better in this most recent game. Would he be a guy you'd be interested getting put on some sort of IR? Would it have to be season-ending IR for him to be placed Yeah, it might have to be.
No, not necessarily. There are two options. So if he makes the 53 initially, but there's a handshake deal, but because they cut Jake Hummel, let's say, or Ben Cleveland,
Right.
then they can put him on IR, and it's not season ending, but he can't play the first 4 weeks. But he has to make the initial 53-man roster.
Right.
Okay. If he's placed on IR now, anytime before Tuesday, then it's season ending IR.
Right. You want the development time for him.
Yes.
I clearly understand that. At the same time, if the Ravens are taking 9 offensive linemen onto their initial 53, and Carson Vincent is one of the 9, then you're really asking a lot for the health of your offensive line and the growth to be enormous for Vincent in the case of an injury cropping up along the offensive tackles. I don't love that scenario. I'm sure you don't love that scenario. So that's kind of been the position where you'd really like him to be put on IR and bring in another competent offensive lineman for your 9th spot while Vincent is, rehabbing and and learning along the way, so that he can still be part of the team and practice and whatnot. It's just a really challenging spot to be in, but I guess that's just what comes with drafting a developmental tackle that has a ton of tools, but not the NFL skills yet.
Okay, so we've scored the offensive. By the way, the offensive line article will be out probably right after you listen to this podcast at the latest. Okay, so take a look out there for the offense notes article. And we did the scoring for Carson Vincent each of the last 2 weeks, and he produced 2 very similar games in terms of aggregate results. The game in PS2 against Dallas, he had a bunch of highlight blocks and a bunch of pancakes. So he had 5 highlight blocks and 4 pancakes, both of which are absurdly high numbers for a single game. He's got a whole lot of nasty in him, which I'm just loving to see.
Yeah.
I mean, you watch a Fa'alele play, and he's just infinitely more naturally violent than Fa'alele, and he really enjoys doing it. I mean, he's dancing around the freaking field, hitting people. So I like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he played just as well and increased his pass blocking efficiency in this last game, but decreased the highlights, decreased the level 2 blocks, which is a great trade-off because the level is the same overall. It's just he had a lot more of it in kind of what I would consider bonus points instead of the raw score. And I want that raw score higher because that's where his pass blocking efficiency resides. So I probably feel better right now. I feel like there's a chance that Carson Vincent might be above the replacement level this year if the Ravens called him. This is the first time I've uttered that publicly. So I think that he could be a guy that could help him this year. I also think the Ravens are absolutely out of their ever-loving minds if they don't carry 10 offensive linemen. You have Vincent. Yes, it does create a need for an extra spot. If you think Rasheen Ali is providing you the long-term value that your 10th offensive lineman does, and it's probably Garrett Dellinger is the guy they would have to expose to waivers. I mean, those guys get claimed. Corey Bullock, I mean, it'd be a pretty high probability he was claimed if he got waived this week. It's not going to happen, but it could be a pretty high chance. So that means it's Garrett Dellinger that they're talking about cutting. I mean, there's just a real chance that he'd get claimed if he gets exposed to this. So, and if he doesn't get claimed immediately, he could get signed to somebody else's practice squad before the Ravens do it. And they say, hey, look, our situation's better. You're our first man up. You're the most important person, in a sense, at 3 positions for us, say. I think it's going to be easier for another team to convince him of that. I think the other thing that another team is going to do is say, look, you're not even Baltimore's first choice. They've got Emory Jones, your old teammate, who they drafted in the 3rd freaking round. And he'll be ahead of you in terms of the depth chart as soon as he's healthy. So you're really not number 10. You're number 11 with Baltimore. Or maybe you're number 12. Maybe they like Nick Samak or Darian Dalcourt better than you. But, they played Darian Dalcourt. This is one of the really bad things. They played Darian Dalcourt ahead of him in this last game. So that makes it kind of a difficult conversation. Anyway,
Do you think that there's any chance that the Ravens were intentionally doing that in order to
mislead.
Yes. Yeah. Just mislead or sneak him onto the roster. The practice squad.
I mean, it could be. Dalcourt is a 2-camp player, so he was here last year, kind of like Bullock, and they seem to have. I thought he might make the roster last year. I thought it should have been a close call because he had guard center versatility and some other things. Now I think his value to the Ravens is that he could be a 2026 center choice if they lose Linderbaum, along with Bullock, along with Dellinger. I think they'd have multiple choices to go to. Mm-hmm. I don't think Samak or Holsky is it, but I think that any of the other three might be. And I think that would be the value I would put on him. But I have to look at it and say, I really don't know exactly what the Ravens are thinking, having Dalcourt on for 21 snaps and then Dellinger on for the rest. I think they would. And he probably outplayed him too. That's the other thing. Dalcourt probably outplayed Dellinger in this last game. Dellinger wasn't terrible, about a C- game, which is that's pretty damn good for a rookie, just starting out in the NFL to be at that level. But Dalcourt probably outplayed him in this last game as well.
I did kind of wonder. You're the offensive line guy, and I haven't keyed in on games. This is the first game I've been able to go back and really focus in on a whole side of the ball. Looking at defense. So I haven't done that with offensive line. Where are you at in regards to the end of the roster offensive linemen for the Ravens who would possibly, make this practice squad, and what the difference is in the talent level of those players and who you think the Ravens might lose out, perhaps like a Dellinger, if they release that guy. And then the other piece of that is what the contractual element and team control element of that is, because I don't necessarily think the talent gap is going to be your main sticking point on this conversation. It's going to be the contractual value that you get and the fact that the team was interested, even though it's a sunk cost, in a particular player.
Yeah, it's a valid point, and the player that comes up a little short if you're looking at the contractual element under a microscope is Ben Cleveland, because he's here only for this year, which is why I think he's a potential. I mean, he's obviously a potential handshake agreement guy just because of that. But Dellinger and Dalcourt in general terms have the exact same contractual relationship with the Ravens. They both have 4 years of team control remaining. Emory Jones, I kind of hope they don't bring back from NFI the entire year. If they do, I hope it's because they need him. I hope because I don't hope that. So but he'd be the offensive tackle depth that this team maybe could lean on in 2025. That said, I mean, he hasn't had any NFL camp experience so far. He's done a little shadow dancing at OTAs, but he hasn't had any since he's been on the NFI list. He hasn't had any camp experience with Ray. I'm not sure he even can. I'm not sure he's allowed to, but he hasn't been on the field at all doing any of the, just walking around, running, anything like that. So I kind of hope he doesn't show for the whole year. And then that gives us the Voorhees treatment, the red shirt treatment for him.
Exactly my thought.
Yeah. Yep. And was that what you were leading into with this, as opposed to all these other rookies?
No. So that's one piece of it. I think as far as the roster construction, the NFI list is perfect for Emory Jones to get 4 years of team control starting in 2026. I was asking specifically about how much are you opposed to relying on practice squad depth versus keeping a 10th offensive lineman that may be the same level of play as the guys you are sneaking onto your practice squad?
Okay, so I have to believe that like Dellinger and Dalcourt are at the same level because Dellinger is my 10th guy. Mm-hmm. If I really believe that exactly, then I shouldn't care that much. But I do think that the risk is probably not immediate for those guys. My guess is neither of them probably gets claimed on waiver wire Wednesday, but that it may be coming after that. It may come in the form of a signing away, like I mentioned, the Ben Mason type signing where somebody else's practice squad is more attractive than the Ravens. Or it may come later in the season as attrition develops. And we know offensive line attrition happens pretty freaking quickly. You end up with some pretty awful players on the fringe of NFL 53s around the league. And a player like Dalcourt or Dellinger, I think, then becomes a hot commodity. So the Ravens need to be cognizant of that, make a choice between these two. In a sense, Dalcourt's survived an entire year on the Ravens practice squad specifically. So he might be the safer guy to try and get through. He's a year older now. I mean, I don't think the teams are going to be all that excited about him, honestly. If you were to get excited about him, it's because of some limited preseason play. And in the case of Dellinger, I think you still have his college play. You still have the scouting that a lot of teams have done on him. The fact that everybody saw LSU play because of Emory Jones and because of plenty of other LSU players. So they probably have a handle on who he is as a player. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but we got to move on. Anyway, get back to the defense.
Yeah, for sure.
I did want to talk. I mean, the one of the interesting things we kind of hit on it in the Bo Braid thing is the Ravens haven't done anything at all with that is not base or nickel, and a standard nickel at that so far. There are on my defensive spreadsheet, there are 30 different packages, and I don't believe the Ravens used every single one of those in 2024, but they used a lot of them. And they include a whole bunch of specialized heavy jumbo formations that you wouldn't repeat for more than 1 or 2 snaps anyway. But for instance, there's 6 different dimes and 8 different nickels in terms of different alignments and combinations of inside and outside linebackers in particular, and defensive linemen that the team has gone to. We're going to have a lot of fun watching this team when they finally go live and Orr gets to work some of this package magic.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm really excited. I know we're not at the questions yet, but there is an interesting question that kind of goes back to what you just mentioned. Yeah, so one of them was about dime defense. Maybe it was dime or quarter.
Right, I got it here.
Yeah.
Oh my God, did I lose it here? Okay, you better say the question or find it if you can on this website, because I don't think I copied it over into my set of 6 questions here that I have for the show.
I will find it in just a second. It was about the corners, going with 4 corners instead of a fourth.
That's
third
it.
Safety.
So it's Brett Hammonds. Thank you, Brett, for the question. Ken, if the Ravens have their top 4 corners healthy, do you think they'll use a lot of 4-corner dime like they did last year, or do you think they'll prefer Kane or Lowry in those packages? I guess here would be my feeling about this, and then I'd like to hear you, Jake, as well on this. I think they would rather have a safety replacing an inside linebacker in the middle of the field, and you typically will not do that with a corner. But Kane or Lowry are good choices to be the dime back. Braid might be a good choice if he's still on the team. And I think Hamilton could be a good choice, which means Lowry goes to the back end. So he and Starks would play the back end with Hamilton up front. There was one moment where Orr was at the podium this summer and alluded to a special use for Hamilton, and he couldn't say what it was. And I'm thinking, does he just mean a dime back? Because that doesn't seem really that different, kind of thing. But he might have. So we'll see what he has in mind for Hamilton.
Yeah, my own thoughts on it. It's all package dependent. What is the offense bringing out on the field? Yeah. If they're going, like 10 personnel, you have 4 wide receivers out there. Play 4 corners. If they're going heavies, then I would prefer linebacker or safety in that position. And since we're talking about dime, we're talking about safety taking over one of those linebacker spots. But it's
always pretty much going to be 11 or 10 in the situations where you're considering dime.
For sure.
But there are cases where a team will go 12 because that's where their receiving strength is. Like if you're playing the Ravens, they might go 12 on 3rd down because that's where their receiving strength is. But even if that's the case, you may automatically go to dime. But I don't think there's a lot of value to having a 4th corner on the field if you've got the other option is Hamilton covering a tight end. I think you may gain more from that.
Right. And I think when you're talking about, Hamilton and Humphrey kind of dealing with some of the heaviers, and you have Jair and Wiggins and Awuzie dealing with more of the speed or outside. And I mean, you're going to have some inside if you have that many corners on the field. But yeah, I just think it's dependent on the offensive package.
All right, great question, Brett. We really appreciate that. Let's see. I think we talked a little bit about order of entry. So why don't we call it here for the first half of the show? We're going to come back. We're going to talk about some individual performances from this game against Washington. We've kind of front-ended this with a lot of roster discussion, but individual performances are important, of course, as well. But before you do that, Jake, tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Real Jake Vogel, Vogel. And I talk Ravens, Georgia football, NFL, and college all together.
All right. Jake's a great source. Make sure you, A, follow him, but B, tag him into an occasional conversation, particularly when you have a question about the draft or relating things to what's happening in the SEC or Georgia football, whatever it might be. He's always a good guy to tag into questions. It's always, by the way, I think it's a good thing to improve your Twitter circle by tagging in different people into conversations. And the guests for this show, I recommend highlighting them all, of course. But Jake, appreciate you coming on today. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study Short, hit me up. We have the Concerns series next week. Hit me up if you'd like to be part of that and give me your specific concern in a DM. They're open on Twitter. Otherwise, please like and subscribe if you're on YouTube and pass this show along to a friend you think might enjoy it. Jake, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.